Hi, everybody. Welcome to another corner conversation on Haggai. Did I do it right? Because I think every time I
Sure.
do it wrong.
I'm the one who knows the least about doing it right
Oh,
in this
that's
setting.
not true. You're good
I
at that stuff. You are, I feel like you're methodical. So
I am, but I'm also like outside of the system, so I get to
you didn't create the
I
system?
didn't create the system, and I also like only interact with it once every like season,
Okay.
just as my time does not allow me to be here as
Yeah,
often as
life.
I would love to be here more,
I
but
know. We'd love to have you more.
life.
Life does happen
It's
over and
life.
over again.
I feel like we're like the Brady Bunch right now, because like obviously we don't know each other,
Story.
but from like the camera, like we're like
I
looking
know,
around.
right? That's so funny. And I always feel that, like, I have this tension, like, do I look at the camera? Do I look at you? Like, where do I
Yeah.
go? Because whenever Greg records it and later I look at it and I'm looking at somebody, like, not at the camera, but looking at them, like, what I see, I'm like, oh, I look so ridiculous. Like, later,
We're
when he posts
professionals. I
it,
don't know if you're actually
posted on
embrace the
Instagram, I'm like,
ridiculous.
oh, embrace. I know, right? I know. Some of us went to a conference this week,
Yeah.
and the hotel I stayed in was very cozy, but there was a Dodge Ram outside my window that would start up their car to warm it. Probably around, like, the first time was probably around 5, and they ran it for literally 30 minutes. And like, so outside my window, there was like a, like just a continue, and I was like, is it like, I didn't know what it was at first. I was like, I thought it was maybe the heater in the room. And so, like, I kicked the heater because I thought maybe if I shake it into submission, it'll stop. And then I look out the window and there's just this Dodge Ram sitting out there. And it was, I mean, it's such a loud car.
Yeah.
And I'm like, could you
Well,
start it elsewhere?
you were in truck country too, which is
I
kind of
was
fun
in truck
because like
country. I don't like the sound.
our communities sit within urban
Yeah,
Minneapolis, and so there are trucks, but
I'm not used to it.
Minneapolis is not built for trucks, so
No.
they are the odd duck. And out where you guys
Yeah,
were, that
that's
truck was very comfortable.
Yeah, it didn't even know what it was doing, I don't think. And I wanted to, like, the first time I looked out the window and, like, probably right into the driver's eyes, like, are you, and like with my short hair, the morning, like, it's bangs, like, straight up, you know? So I'm like looking out the window, crazed. And then he left soon after that. But the second time, like, they had like an auto start, so they weren't even in the vehicle.
Right.
And I wanted to go. It was, I mean, I only stayed 2 nights, so I was like, all right, I'm not gonna like go and knock on their window. But I had temptation to like, so I was a little tired this week. And before we started, we were talking about just talking too much.
Yeah.
And that third day after not really getting enough sleep, and like, and when I'm alone, like some people, like Greg, when he's alone, he's like, let's go to bed. Like, I want to go to sleep. When I'm by myself, I'm like, I don't have to do what anybody else wants me to do. I can do whatever I want. And so, like, going to bed is difficult.
Greg's travel and hotel habits are bizarre to me because when I don't get to travel a lot, and so
Hmm.
whenever I get to travel, whenever in the past I got to go to church money events or different things like
Yeah.
that, it was always like we're out, we're in the world. And so I'm gonna do what I
Yeah.
normally can't. I'm gonna go to the hotel vending machine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do
I
something,
know,
right?
right? I do feel
And
that. Like,
and
I'm gonna go buy some chips.
and Greg
So
is
silly.
like it's 7 o'clock. Good night.
I know. I know. They were all like in their hotel room at 9. And like I stayed at the hotel that was connected to the event. So I'd start going to bed at 9:30, but then I would meet somebody on the way, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'd meet somebody else on the way. So by the time I actually got to bed, it was like 11 or so, because it took me, an hour and a half to just walk
You know,
30 feet, you
my
know.
big takeaway from this though is that you're actually like the desire to be like live it up and during the trip, but you were the only responsible pastor from the corner because all the rest of
Oh
them
no.
booked too late that they had to book offsite.
No. So we thankfully Scott chose to stay in one of the other guys' rooms, so we didn't have to like pay for an extra hotel and all that.
Yeah.
So I was only on site because Scott was the responsible one that was on site,
Uh,
and so he gave me his hotel so he could go and stay with somebody else. And then yeah, so I was not the responsible one.
I
No,
wasn't there. The
no,
only thing that I know is that
yeah,
uh, 2 weeks ago, Greg
yeah,
and Rich were talking about where they were gonna
yeah.
stay because they had to figure it out
Yep,
yet.
yep, yep. And that, I mean, I knew I was going to stay wherever somebody gave up a room for me. So not the responsible one. And they were up early working every morning, and I don't know. So all responsible. Did you guys have anything exciting this week?
No.
No, just no.
Students
Babies.
students are coming back to
Oh
North Central. So
yeah.
last week or yesterday, literally yesterday. So a week ago, probably when this podcast comes out, classes started and all that.
Yeah.
So
Do you build a new
we'll see.
team every semester?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
If I
Okay.
if I do my job right, that should end hopefully in the fall. I'll start having rosters consistent.
Yeah.
Um, the Smash Ultimate roster that I built for those of you that cares has been consistent for the last
Smash, what is it?
Ultimate. So it's just like Super Smash Bros.
Oh, oh my gosh.
Um,
My daughter would love that so much.
yeah. So they've been
You should
consistent.
extend this to a youth program to get kids into North Central.
I have been working.
Seriously.
I have been in conversations with the
Yeah.
district youth director for like honestly any churches. Like I will, as long as they can pay gas,
Talk to me.
I will go to youth groups and
We
do
should do
things.
this. Let's talk about that because
Yeah.
that I've been thinking a lot about having like because I mean we do a youth event once a month, which is great. It's like the first Friday. I know you guys on the podcast want to listen to all this, but like I've been thinking a long time about like because there's some kids that want to do the gaming stuff and it's
Yeah.
different than what our youth get together
Mhm.
has. And I think this like something like this would be so much fun on the north side and even just community kids would just have so much fun. Like I
Yeah.
think that I don't know. I think there's some cool opportunities.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I know
Yeah.
I've talked with North High School a little bit, and
Yeah.
their biggest challenge
Oh,
has been transportation. And
yeah.
so just because like we don't have the resources to do a lot offsite yet,
Yeah.
and so getting people into North Central
Yeah.
something future we want to do,
Yeah.
but we just don't have the ability
Okay.
to do the church fan thing and
You
pick
and
kids
me,
up.
let's talk about this. We
Yeah,
can make this happen.
we'd
I'm
love to.
excited because
Let's but let's actually like finish the work.
oh, what? This work or which
The
work?
work.
The work. What's the work? Oh,
The
the
work.
work.
Yeah.
Are you
Okay.
trying to
I'm trying to segue.
segue
Trying
into
to segue
Haggai
into
and
the
finish the
Haggai.
work?
Yeah.
Oh, so they didn't finish the work. Or they did. It just took them a long
Eventually.
time.
Yeah,
It took them a long
they
time.
paused.
They did a pause, a long pause.
Yeah, we were talking about this before we
Yeah.
started recording. It's
Yeah.
like, Nehemiah returns,
Mm-hmm.
reassesses the walls, rouses the people who
Yep.
were there, and then people who have returned to start rebuilding
Yeah.
the wall. At the same time, you have Ezra, who is rebuilding the temple,
Yeah.
and
Zerubbabel
um,
is in there and
you have the governor and the priest and all of this, and there's the reading of the law,
yeah.
and then the foundations of the temple get laid. It
Yep.
starts like they get set, and
The
the
neighbors come.
people who had saw the first temple before it was destroyed
Yeah.
see it, and it brings them to tears
Yeah.
because it doesn't measure up,
No.
doesn't check up, and so this definitely plays into part of where we pick up
Yeah.
in Haggai, where
Yeah.
they
This week.
had stopped working,
Yep.
and that discouragement probably led a part to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think sorry, were you gonna say something, Sam?
Well, I'm wondering, I'm wondering how much euphoric recall played into that.
Yeah.
It was so much better.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, maybe it was better, but maybe it wasn't this much better.
Yeah, but I don't know because I agree. But also, like King Solomon had all the resources and he built the temple, and so he was wealthy and he wanted to build this huge thing that was, I mean, enormous and spectacular. And I don't know if they had the resources now that they had when Solomon was king. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, even the types of materials they talked about, like Solomon, it was like get the gold, the silver, and all this, whereas they're going to get lumber. Like
Yeah.
it's a whole. I do think that there was part of this. I do think it was spectacular before and not as spectacular now.
Well,
Maybe not the huge gap,
yeah.
but like but it's I mean like it's the temple, so it's not necessarily about the materials.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I mean the work that David did ahead of time, where
Yeah,
he had contracts with Lebanon
yeah,
for the cedars shipped
yeah,
down,
yeah.
and all
Cedar,
this
yeah.
stuff,
So there's still lumber, but yeah.
and those partnerships didn't exist in the same
No.
way, um, and something that doesn't get talked a lot about is that there were specific artists that God
Yeah.
had called,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
both in the first when the the tabernacle was being built,
Yeah.
and the Ark of the Covenant. There
Yeah.
were specific artists that God had set apart and called. And then that same thing is true. There's very detailed descriptions
Yeah.
of how the temple was to be designed,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
what motifs were supposed to be on what walls,
Yeah. And there's
um,
none of that in this part of the story. Like
yeah,
in the rebuilding, the directions are
rebuilt the temple.
less. Yeah, rebuild the temple. And they did get some of their supplies back because like they
Hmm.
looted the temple before they went into exile.
Hmm.
They looted the temple, and the king in his heart to rebuild the temple because he felt like he wanted to rebuild the temple.
Yeah.
They gave back all these things they had stolen. So there was some beautiful things.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I love
Go ahead.
I love the
Keep going.
complex history of that though,
Yeah, keep talking.
because I know, and part of this is that euphoric vision of things, the ideal, but there's this whole piece where um, King, I think it's Xerxes who gives the
Yeah,
actual command for them to go back, was that the Persians had this belief of um, all, and this is so funny because it's modern belief too, is that all gods are the same God, and
yeah,
so um, that the king's power is directly tied to the god
yeah,
being pleased with them, and so all these nations that they had captured,
yeah.
the goal was not like, wow, we really want you guys worshiping the Israelite God so that you guys can
Hmm.
rise up and become a strong nation, and
Yeah,
the goal was um, there's no worship of the God happening in Israel.
yeah,
And so we're going to send you back so you can establish worship. You guys can worship the way that you want to, because all worship of God is actually worshiping our
yeah.
God.
Right.
And so that was like the goal of it. And so that's where you see all this generosity
Yeah,
from Xerxes, even to the point where he's like, and when you're leaving, you are to go to all the houses in the towns that you go through, and they're supposed to give you gold and
yeah.
silver so that you can actually buy
Afford
sacrifices,
and
so that you
yeah,
can, because the point
yeah.
of it wasn't necessarily to reestablish worship
The
of
God of Israel.
the God of
Yeah.
Israel. Their theology was that all everyone was actually worshiping their God, and they just didn't know it yet.
And they just didn't know it yet.
So, but
I love
so
that because that is like, don't we all think that sometimes? Like,
yeah,
you're just worshiping our God, but you just don't know it yet.
yeah,
And that's an interesting complexity for sure.
yeah, and definitely something we wrestle through with. It's
Yeah.
not as cut and dry or
Hmm.
even as complicated as we want it to be. It's
Yeah.
somewhere in between. But
Yeah.
wrestling with that is an important piece of this, especially because um, we get this very like, let's see, it's that vision of the ideal,
Yeah.
um, and then also this vision of other,
Yeah.
because the Israelites don't see it that way.
No. Well, and I even like think that there's this whole in the New Testament it talks about how God works all things out for the good. And it's like even in this moment, like maybe King Cyrus that was his mindset, like, in rebuilding the temple, you're worshiping our God because and like maybe that's what his mindset was, but it still benefited the Israelites and it still benefited the God of Israel. It still benefited the temple. So it's like maybe his motivation was wrong, but
Hmm.
in the end it still worked out for the good of the people,
Hmm.
So I love those little complexities because I think that life is hard, right? And like there are so many moments where like you feel like somebody was trying to do something to harm you or hurt you or benefit themselves instead of benefit you, but like God does work it out sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Not always, but sometimes,
Hmm.
and I don't know. I really like that. Thanks, Ty. That was good. That's all we need to say. But no, I'm just
That's all you
kidding.
need to say.
No, but I also really love like in the same thing, like when they like we've talked about this a few times over the last couple of weeks. They leave. They go to Jerusalem. They start building. They build the altar first. They build the foundation, and then the neighbors get upset. And the neighbors, who are those neighbors? Like they're Samaritans. They're Jewish people that didn't get exiled, that stayed around and maybe intermarried. There's other groups of people that had nothing to do with the Jewish religion and Israelites, but and like some enemies even. And like, but those are the people that Zerubbabel said, no, this is ours. And that caused a 20-year delay. And I think too, like in the beginning of Haggai, like he talks about like get back to work, but I do think they were afraid, like, because they were forced to stop. It wasn't like they just said stop and they're like, okay, forget it. No, they were forced to stop. And what does that forcing to stop look like? And at the same time, like the complexity of building the wall, and what does that look like? And people fought against the building of the wall. And there's all this in this area. There's all sorts of conflict. That's the word I'm looking
Because at
for.
what point does it go from, yeah, they told us to stop, and there was military force to enforce that. Yeah, that happened 8 years ago. It happened 10 years ago. It
Right.
happened 15. At what point do you go, okay, it's
Yeah.
time to start again? Well,
Yeah.
apparently, 18, 20 years later was not time to start again
Yeah.
in their mind.
Yeah.
But, at some point, because that's when he shows up and goes, what the heck are you doing sitting
Yeah.
around paneling your houses? Get back to work.
Yeah. Yep.
Where was that
I think
point, which would have
yeah.
been the optimum point to go
back to work. Because
Yeah.
even when they did start, like the neighbors went, okay, they're starting again. So like somebody had to go to back to the king, the current king, and say, look in your archives, whatever the right words are. It's not archives, but they say something like that. And like King Darius or King Cyrus sent us. Like if you look back, you will find that King Cyrus said we were supposed to do this. And like, so they still, even 18 years later, they tried to fight it again and stop it. And so like, I think no matter what, there was going to be people trying to fight to stop it. And I also think that even though like people are like, it's not yet time, like so many times in the Old Testament, we see a prophet come in and say, okay, now's the time. Now is time. And I can understand why they were waiting for God to intervene and stop and say, okay, now's the time, like move. Get going, like I don't know. I mean, I don't think they should have paused for 18 years. At the same time, like I can see how it happened.
Well, and there's a good part of this too, where God doesn't just say, "Hey, get back to work."
No.
But He promises to help. He promises to.
Yeah,
to
I love
protect
that.
them.
I love that.
And a lot of this is, and so the lament of the Jewish exiles was the idea of like missing out on God's presence,
Right.
And that was the true significance of the temple.
Yep.
Was that it was seen as the place where God's presence dwelled among them.
Yeah.
It was a sign of His approval of the nation.
Yeah.
And you see that with a lot of the bad kings. His threat to them is that I will dwell there no longer. When he talks about the things that were happening in the former temple,
Right.
and the promises for the temple to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And then we have this temple rebuilt.
Yeah.
And it's really part of the promise is God will not only help rebuild the temple, but that He will dwell in that temple again. His presence will be there. And I know that there's a note in here. I think is really important. Is this idea of Jesus' future coming and His dwelling among us.
Yeah.
And then pointing even further forward, where Jesus points to the temple and says, in 3 days this is going to be. This is going to be destroyed in 3 days. We'll rebuild it, pointing to His own death, resurrection.
Yeah, and the temple will be in us instead of He dwells in us. Yeah. I love, just to step back what you said just now, like I love in the end of chapter 1 where like the people are obedient and God, like out of their obedience, like He first, like in the first part, it's like you stopped. You have all these needs that aren't being met, which I was listening to something earlier. It was talking about, did they have needs that weren't being met, or did they have this, like, they wanted more, because they were like rebuilding these houses in beautiful ways and instead of like the temple. So it's like, like your purse has holes in it and you don't have all the things you want or need. Like, did they not have their needs met, or were they just unsatisfied? Which I was like, that's an interesting thought, because I feel like we can all go in that mode where we feel unsatisfied. But then they were quickly obedient, which is unseen in the Old Testament, but in their obedience, God, His next response is, I am with you, which you were saying. And then He gave them the energy to do it, which like every time I think of something I feel like God's telling me to do, I'm like, could you you also give me the energy to do it? Because like I feel kind of tired right now, you know? And so like I love that that was God's response. And now we go into chapter 2, and like I think you were saying this earlier in Ezra chapter 3, there's a moment where the they built the foundation, and the people that had seen the temple before cried and were upset about how this isn't what it used to be. And then we have this moment again in Haggai 2 where they say, is it Zerubbabel or it's Haggai? He says, I know this isn't what you saw. I know this isn't what you expected. You saw the house in the former glory. It doesn't look like that now. It seems like nothing. And so it's like they're upset again. And then later they're upset again because they built the temple, and in the old temple, like a cloud kind of hovered above it, like showing that like God's spirit was in there. And that doesn't really happen in this new temple. So it's like in this whole build, there's 3 moments where people are really upset. Like the people that had seen what it was before to what it is now. I think those are all distinct moments, because like the one is so early on, like the foundation's been built. That was 18 years ago, and they're upset. And now we have it again, and they're upset. And then they have it again at the end where they're upset. And it's like, even with that comfort, they're still kind of upset that it doesn't look like it used to look. And I don't know. That's just really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Just it's that whole thing of they don't still quite get it.
Yeah.
And they won't still quite get it. I don't think
No.
we quite get it.
No.
And I think too, I can think in my own life of being like, all right, God told me to do this thing.
Yeah.
And then I go and I try to do the thing, whatever it is. And I'm wrestling a lot with that right now, is, you know, with life decisions and work and how my wife and I have decided to set up our family and all these things, and just going, I feel like a lot like God does a lot of, and this is just gonna be a raw moment, but I really feel in my own life, and maybe it's just because I'm too thick-skulled for God to work with me any other way. He does a lot of bait and switch, I feel like, where God's like, hey, go do this thing, and I go do the thing that I think God's supposed to have me do, or I go step out and I move in a direction, and then God's like, now I got you here, I'm gonna actually do this different thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like what I thought it was going to look like.
Yeah.
I mean, just the hit list. I came to North Central as a music major, partly because I did music all throughout high school. I thought I was going to be the next Switchfoot.
I mean, I see it.
I
do.
My hair just gives it all away. And then while I was there, we're like really just reaffirming call to ministry. So I step out and so call change my degree. And then I am terrible at Spanish. Told by a teacher I have a mouth like a German. And so then I take American Sign Language because I had friends, and then I have this, deep feeling of like, if I don't turn this into a degree, I won't use this after college. Not feeling called to be an interpreter, but that was the only degree North Central had. And so I add another degree because it was cheaper, more time saving, and not wasting money to do that. And then through that, friends of the deaf student at North Central is the daughter of the church where my wife worked at the time. And that's how I meet my wife.
Which is good.
Which is like, and I still haven't used my American Sign Language interpreting in any sort of like full capacity, but I met my wife because I changed majors and I became friends with people who knew her. And then through that, just like everything, I can take it off throughout my life. There's moving to Minneapolis, really St. Louis Park, but Minneapolis, from a little bit more rural to pursue church planting, and through global pandemic and whatnot. Not successful in church planting, but that leads me to work in high school, just because trying to use my American Sign Language interpreting degree in special education, and I start volunteering for the high school esports team, and now I'm doing esports at North Central, and and I have this sense, and this is not me saying that I'm moving or doing anything. That's my disclaimer in case my employer hears me talking. But I have this sense that North Central is in my final
Yeah.
landing spot, and I don't
Right.
know what God's doing with me in esports, because I never, 13-year-old me never envisioned
Yeah.
myself working in esports.
Yeah.
And I don't know why God has me where I am now. And
Yeah.
I don't know what work God is setting. It's not the grand vision I have for myself. I thought I was going to be a rock star, right?
Yeah.
And now God has led me to this very obscure university, in a very obscure role where I think most people at the university don't know I exist. And I don't know what God's doing
Yeah.
around me. I know God's doing a lot of work in me,
Yeah.
but it doesn't look like the grand vision.
No.
And so it's this long spiel to say that, like, God calls us oftentimes to do this work, and our grand vision isn't oftentimes what the work turns into.
No.
For whatever reason.
Mm-mm.
But that doesn't mean that God doesn't have a grander vision
Yeah.
to accomplish something.
Yeah.
To go back to the work that I've already seen done,
Yeah.
my wife is incredible.
Yeah.
And if nothing else comes out of the American Sign Language Interpreting Switch, and that deep felt conviction that God put on my life to add that 2 years to my college education,
She's worth it.
my wife is way worth it.
Yeah.
I would probably do 6 more years of college if it meant, getting to meet my wife and have this amazing life we've built together. Amazing, not
Yeah.
easy, but
Amazing.
yeah, we're getting teary eyed.
No, I'm with you. I'm like listening to your story and thinking like I'll get teary eyed with you. Like when I was younger in my 20s, like I was the oldest of my sibling. I mean, my sister. I have 2 stepsisters, so I wasn't technically the oldest, but like in my family house, I was the oldest, and so I never broke rules. Like that was, but we have a very broken family system, and like I love everybody in my family. I think that we are somewhat in a better place than we were when I was younger, but I didn't break any rules ever. Like I always did the right thing. People always thought I was older than I was, not because I looked older, because I still don't look older than I am, but like I just was always like super mature. And then in my mid-20s, like in college, I kind of just felt like I wanted to break rules, because like I was always doing the right things. And then I think my life pretty much fell apart when I was about 25, and like older than some people are already married, but like I made a lot of decisions that hurt me significantly, and ended up moving with my aunt and uncle in Washington. And my life, this was a path, my life could have gone 2 ways at this moment, and it could have been, very painful, very broken, following the trajectory that it's always been, or I could have gone to Washington and saved my life. And not just me, but God saved my life. And like when I went out there, I remember I was working for my uncle, like helping him. He was flipping houses, so I was just doing, menial tasks in the house because I didn't have any construction, obviously. But like just doing that, and I'm like, I really over and over again thought about the Old Testament book Hosea, when like she like just keeps running away and just ends up in the thorn bushes and I was like, and then she ends up in the wilderness, and at that point she realizes like she no longer calls me master, but she calls me husband. And it's this beautiful story of Israel and God in like in this real life experience. And I just remember driving and like feeling like that had changed in me, where like I was no longer calling God my master, but like my husband. I mean, not really, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And like the person, I serve you because I love you, not because I'm supposed to. And like just getting counseling, and I met my husband there, and man, like God worked all of those really painful moments into good. And man, like you go to North Central or you go wherever, and you think you're going to get married, you think you're going to, you're going to, because it's North Central Bridal College, you're supposed to get married, right? Or you think that like you're going to get married young, you're going to have kids, you're going to do ministry, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be clean, and everything's going to like, you have this idea when you're young what it's going to look like, and then it doesn't. It doesn't look like what you thought it was going to look like. But like also, thank God, like at this point in my life, I'm like, man, I was broken, but like if I didn't know, I didn't know I was broken, like I didn't know that there was things I needed to work through. But like if God didn't like, if I didn't go, like if I didn't move, or my life didn't point me to this place where I had to move or felt like I had to move, like I would have stayed where I was and I wouldn't have changed, and God wouldn't have shown me the growth I needed, and my family wouldn't be as healthy as it is. And not that it's perfect, but like all these things. And man, at this point, I am really grateful for some painful things, because without it, I don't think I would have known who I was. I don't know. Your turn to cry. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to cry.
Well, yeah, I think God takes a lot of circuitous routes in our lives, because I graduated with my bachelor in music and performance.
Yeah.
And I was singing with the opera. I was singing with Dale Warland. I was singing with Bach Society. I was doing this. I was teaching voice lessons, and I was like, this is going to be my life. And I was working with my voice teacher. I was getting ready. I was actually just a few months from leaving and going to Milan to study for years with for a few months with a teacher who had she came to the United States every so often, and I auditioned and got into her studio, and I was months away, and I was like, I can't do this. I've got a wife. I've got two kids with one more on the way, and I would need to abandon them for 6 months. And it was shortly after that I flamed out. I mean, I left every single performing opportunity. I was like, what am I doing? And it was that point that God said, I still want you in music, but I want you to turn towards worship ministry, and so that's when I totally changed my focus, and because up to then worship ministry was just a side gig for what I really wanted to do. And so it totally changed, and then I went back to went to seminary, got my MDiv, and that was a whole thing too, because I was coming to the end of seminary, and I was working at a Baptist church up in Maple Grove, and they called me in, and they said, we our budget is we need to cut your position, and this is like April, and they said you're going to be basically beginning of June is going to be it, and so I'm coming to the end of seminary. And I'm going, what is going on here? Well, I had been kind of looking for, positions, thinking more kind of full time, and I ran across a position and had an interview July 25th, and this was out east. It was out in Morgantown. And I had my interview July 25th, and September 5th, I was on site.
Yeah.
But had I not, this position ended in June.
Yeah.
My interview in July, and in September, I'm totally away from out of the state, and and it was hard to get called into the office, and they said, we don't have the money for you. We got to cut your position. I'm like, what's going on? I want to graduate seminary. What the heck? And so it was just. And looking back, I can see that path, but that was not the path I had figured out.
No.
I figured I was gonna end my life doing opera and musical theater for the rest of my life, and now that's the side gig.
I know, that's like the thing. I think I was thinking about, I mean, even my son, he is young still, but he talks about being an actor and things like that all the time, and he's gifted in it. I know that's mom goggles, or that's what they would say, but his whole life he's done impressions of people. Since he was tiny, he's done impressions, when he watches in The Incredibles or whatever, he's always doing impressions, and he loves doing theater and the community theater, all this stuff. But he also talks about being a dad, and I think there's going to be a point where there's choices to be made, because it is hard to do something big like that and have a family. And but God has such a good way to work some of these things together, and know what is more important. I think sometimes right now I feel a little too busy for my family, and they're all homebodies, so definitely too busy. And I heard a speaker a long time ago talk about how her family has, like, she would travel the world. And she was like, my family has grace for me to do that. And it was like, my family does not. That's not the grace that my family has. And even now, like, I can see, like, there's moments where, I'm too busy and I hear about it. And I'm just like, I have to make choices. These kids are given to me, and my responsibility is them. And I have to set priorities where they know how important they are to me, And so I'm crying because I'm in the middle of it,
Well, and Scott, you know this too, because there are times I've filmed with Greg in the Uptown community in the past where my daughter, who's almost
3.
almost 3, that's insane. But even as little as she could walk, she would waddle up while I was filling in for Greg.
Yeah.
And I'd pick her up and sit with her in my lap while speaking, or she'd be loud or whatever. And it's this moment where it's like, my wife and I talked about it afterwards, because Corner's been a place that's very, like, all of our communities, whether they have separate rooms and ministries and whatnot for kids. Kids are something that's very welcome in Corner. Yeah. And that's something that's part of the reason why we've been so invested even after becoming parents. But it's this whole thing of, like, I tell Rachel, like, no matter how the community feels, like, even at 1.5, my daughter needs to know that she's priority. That whatever I'm doing, she can step into, and I'm still going to prioritize her. And I think.
I mean, even now when you guys lead worship, she's like, she just wants to be up there, and everyone loves it. Everyone loves.
I'm glad. We're very self-conscious about it, because obviously we grew up in a lot more organized traditions within church, and so there's a place for kids, and a lot of times in the communities we grew up in, the place for kids is in
a different room
or a different building, preferably.
A different building.
Yeah. So. But no, I think that's like this for our church community going through Haggai at this time has really been important. Just that re-examining of priority and accomplishing the work, whatever it is that God is putting in front of us communally as a church. Yeah. But then also individually in the lives of the people who God is bringing into the communities at this time. Yeah. And then this week, there's just a really important reminder that God's not just going to say, hey, go do this thing, but he's going to be present in it. Yeah. And that's in spite of us having a vision that is far less grand than what God's vision is. Yeah.
Or we thought it was going to be, like, just to go back to this. I mean, we can keep talking. I didn't want to interrupt, but what we thought it was going to be. Like this story is this, there are these people that thought this temple had to be grand and beautiful and like intense and all of these things. And it's going to be, it looks less than it was. It doesn't mean God's not doing the work in it. It doesn't mean that, like the next verse, it says to be strong, in 2:4-5, it's like, be strong, all you people. I am with you. And he said that again in the last chapter. I am with you. This is what I covenanted. That's a toughie. And my spirit remains among you. Don't fear. And I think that we do have these grand ideas of what ministry looks like or what our lives are going to look like. And sometimes they feel like they look less than they're supposed to be. And I think that be strong. Like, God is in this new temple, just like he was in the old temple, and what we thought was going to be isn't, but it's still like he's with us. And like, I don't know, I think we have ego, not like anybody in this room, of course, but like other people like have ego. I have ego for sure. And you think, like, God created me to be this person, and I know I have gifts to share to the world, and I believe we do. And I believe that, like, he told us to love our neighbors, which is seems like a much smaller task than like being on a big stage or being, this full-time gig and like, or being a rock star and, or like being a huge, like for me, it's like having a huge nonprofit that's like serving the, having a huge community center, or like my glasses have a magnetic thing and I just moved them. Well, I try to pretend like it's not, but anyways, like, I just feel like God is saying, this isn't what you expected, but I'm still with you in it.
Right. And if you look at the progression, I mean, Solomon's temple was just
Yeah.
massive. And this one, not so impressive. And this is where he starts to drop this. He says, I am with you. Well,
Yeah.
that's the concept of Emmanuel.
Yeah.
And he's setting up for
Yeah.
a tiny little baby in a
Yeah.
backwater town, in a cave, in a trough.
Yep.
You know?
I'm with you.
And it's, we're going, hey, God, this is going the wrong way. What
Yeah.
the heck is going this way?
That's so good.
And,
Yep.
and it's like, well, actually, this is part of my plan. You just
Yeah.
don't see it.
No.
But I'm bringing everything together, and it's going to blow your mind.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good. That is really
I am
good.
with you.
Emmanuel.
God with us. I
Yep.
mean, this is like, whoa,
Yeah.
hang on a second.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good.
Yeah, that about sums it up.
I think so. There's no Richard, so I think
No
you
Rich.
you did the Rich's wrap up.
Okay.
And
All right.
I am with
Rich,
you.
I'm coming for your job, buddy.
Just in case you saw that. But I love that. Well, let's pray. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, we can pray on our own, but I do think that I should have just ended it, but I am with you. That's good. All right. See you next week.